Sexual sin is a liar. As I talked about in the first session, I came to the Lord when I was 16 years old. I eventually backslid because I believed the lie that I could not walk in victory over sexual temptation. When I backslid, I plunged into great spiritual darkness. The further away from God I got in my sin, the more deceived I became about everything in life. I was a mess. The Bible talks about the deceitfulness of sin. And I need to tell you that you cannot be involved in ongoing sin without being deceived. And when I say deceived, I mean deceived about a lot of things. Romans 1 is a perfect picture of my life of sin. It says that these people who were so driven by sexual lust that they suppressed the truth in unrighteousness and exchanged the truth of God for a lie. I didn't understand this at the time, but that describes the state of mind I was in when I was in my sin. When we give over to sin, we are in a very real way fellowshipping with demonic entities. Jesus said that Satan is the father of lies and that there is no truth in him. These spiritual beings bring their atmosphere of deception into our lives, and it taints all of our perceptions in life. I was very deceived and believed many falsehoods about God, about other people, and most of all about myself. In spite of my utter confusion in life, I had a ridiculous amount of confidence that I had a handle on the truth. I was absolutely clueless as to how deceived I was. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to just acknowledge to yourself that sin has probably affected your grasp of truth more than you have realized. You will never really come into truth until you can see the lies that you have bought into. Let me share a few untruths that I bought into when I was in that terrible period of spiritual darkness. The first lie I believed was that pornography, masturbation, and hooking up with girls would be awesome experiences. And it is true that sin is pleasurable for a season. But as you give over to sexual sin, each experience becomes a little less pleasurable, and before you know it, a lot of what you give over to is just because you're addicted to it. And that brings me to the second lie, that there are no lasting consequences attached to sin. Solomon said his own iniquities will capture the wicked, and he will be held with the cords of his sin. I'll get into this more in the next session, but for now, let me just say that there are dreadful and long-lasting consequences that will be very difficult to get rid of. The third lie I bought into was that I was a godly guy with a little sin problem. In 1983, I was in Bible school and was so full of lust for girls in my class that I could hardly concentrate on what my instructors were teaching us. Many times I would leave school and go to an adult bookstore to act out and give over to my lust. And yet at the same time, I actually believed that I was walking with God. I thought the intensity of my personality meant I had this passionate love for the Lord. And of course, I wanted to believe the best about myself, so I convinced myself that I was on fire for God. But the truth was, only a few months after entering Bible school, I was already backslidden in my heart. The idea that I was living a godly life is ludicrous to me as I look back upon it now. The truth was that I was a hypocrite, putting out an image of being a godly young man while living in habitual sexual sin in secret. The fourth lie I accepted and believed was that my sexual sin wasn't that bad. This tendency to minimize the evil nature of sin is common with anyone who gives himself over to sin. The more a person sins, the tinier God and His commandments become in his thinking. The deeper a person goes into sin, the less he's affected by biblical admonitions about sin. There are some very frightening warnings in Scripture about those who practice sin. But it's incredible that a person can read those warnings and just sort of gloss over them as if they don't really mean what they say. Again, because God was so tiny in my mind, His warnings against sin didn't really affect me. Let me tell you something J.C. Ryle said about the deceitfulness of sin. He said, "You may see this deceitfulness in the amazing proneness of men to regard sin as less sinful and dangerous than it is in the sight of God, and in their readiness to extenuate it, make excuses for it, and minimize its guilt. Men try to cheat themselves into the belief that sin is not quite so sinful as God says it is, and that they are not so bad as they really are." The fifth lie I'll mention was that other people were the cause of my problems. For instance, because I was so domineering and manipulative with my wife, every time she attempted to talk to me about my sinful life, I would find a way to somehow turn it around and make her feel as though she was the cause of my problems. And if it wasn't them, then I would blame God for making me the way that I was. And on it went, deceiving and being deceived. Maybe you can relate to some of the things I dealt with, but I have good news. God can turn everything around for you just like He did for me. David said, "The Lord is near to all who call upon Him, to all who call upon Him in truth." If you will begin to call upon the Lord to expose the lies of the enemy that you have bought into, and to bring you into the truth about yourself and your situation, He will surely answer your prayer. Start calling out to Him today.